All right. Welcome to tonight's live stream. This is the latest edition of what I call the Sunday roast, where I'm your host, Israel Kimwin, and we defend Christianity against arguments from groups like Rabbinic Judaism, Islam, atheism, and so forth. So today we're going to be looking at a common claim made mostly by Rabbinic Jews who say that Jesus was not the Messiah. And they say, you know what? No, it's so obvious for Jews to see that Jesus was not the Messiah, but they have done the complete opposite. And what do I mean by that? Well, as time's gone on, right? Jesus has come and gone. Jesus' impact, as we know from history, just looking back at history and seeing how it plays out today, Jesus' actions have radically changed the whole world. That's undeniable. You don't even have to be a Christian to acknowledge this. But one of the things we see many Jews today, and I'm going to show you one of today's most popular rabbis, come with the same sort of mindset and argumentation. Over the years, for hundreds and hundreds of years, we've seen many Jews say, Rabbinic Jews, say that it's so obvious for us as Jews to see that Jesus was not the Messiah. They know exactly what it's going to look like. They know exactly how the time period of Messiah is going to be. But yet, since the time that Jesus has come, was crucified, died and rose again, right? And Christianity has spread far and wide into all nations across the globe. The Jews, time and time again, have found themselves time and time again falling for false Messiah after false Messiah after false Messiah. You can't make this up. So what we're going to do today, this is actually quite funny. I've got my customary stream smoothie, right, for us to digest the protein that we're going to be dealing with today. We're going to be dealing with some arguments. One classical argument, which you're going to see gets torn to shreds today. And you're going to be going away from this as a Christian, looking at this saying, well, you know what? I'll never fall for this lie again. I'll never believe this misinformation again. And also, what you're going to see today is you're going to walk away from today's live stream thinking to yourself, well, how did I not know this before? Because just to set this up a little bit, right, before we get into a couple of clips and I start showing you some quotes from a book. It was a couple of weeks ago, right? I was listening to a live stream from Anthony Rogers, right? Popular apologist in the Christian space. And he was talking about our famous rabbi that we love to engage with on today's channel. You're going to see him again in a moment, Rabbi Singer. And what he was saying was, he says, look, he was listening to Rabbi Singer the other day, and Rabbi Singer was saying something along the lines of, Jews know how to find the Messiah, etc. Jews know how to find the Messiah. And it's obvious that Jesus is false. And he started talking about how he's planning to do a live stream, or he would like to do a live stream at some point in the future, about many of the false messiahs that Jews have believed in since the time of Christ. And it's interesting because as he was saying this, I immediately thought back to reading this book a few years ago, right? Called The Messiah Texts. Because I remember reading in this book about one specific individual who I read this book and I was mind blown. I was taken aback. I was shocked that these things even existed. What are these things you're talking about, Israel? Let me tell you. Some of the individuals that are mentioned in this book are people that people like Rabbi Tavai Singer, Rabbinic Jews, do not want you to know about. Why? Because it destroys this popular notion that they like to say that the Jews have all their ducks in a row. They know who the Messiah is. They know what it's going to look like. And it will be as easy as that to find out and to proclaim the Messiah, as the King of the Jews, the Son of David, when he shows up on the scene. Now, it's interesting because when you think about it from that perspective, in order to continue to spread this lie, to spread this misinformation, that it's obvious for us to see that Jesus wasn't the Messiah, they have to minimize and not mention or not talk about the many examples of false messiahs. And look, I'm not just talking about someone who comes on the scene and says, look, I'm the Messiah, follow me. These are examples of people where many Jews, many of the everyday Jews, many of the Jewish scholars, they were carried away into these beliefs as well. So it's not just someone comes on the scene and says, yeah, I'm the Messiah. These are people who come on the scene and say they're the Messiah, but people believe them. People believe them. This is why it's so mind-boggling, because I remember reading through this book, and I'm gonna show you some quotes from this book today. I remember reading through this book and just thinking to myself, how did I never hear about this? The amount of times you hear Jewish rabbis today, like Tobiah Singer, mention that Jesus isn't the Messiah, and the amount of times you hear people like Rabbi Singer say stuff like, it'll be obvious in the time of the Messiah comes. It'll be so obvious we'll all be able to see it. There's clear signs we need to look for. We can't take those sorts of arguments seriously anymore when you realize that there's a huge list of skull and bones in their history that many of them do not want you to know about. So from that live stream, I said to myself, you know what? I want to highlight that one individual that I read about in this book. This has multiple examples, but the one individual in this book that rocked me, right? Rocked me, and I'm saying this in a good way, right? It's one of those, have you ever been in a situation where you just learn something new and it's just like, wow, that's what it was like, all right? But before we do this, before we jump into that, I even did a little drawing for you to see in a little bit. I'll show you that in a moment as well. Before we do that, I want to play some of our favorite Rabbi Tobiah Singer, who we love to engage with. Our favorite rabbi who we love to engage with on this channel, right? We're going to listen. I'm going to play 3 videos, sections of 3 videos for you. And the reason I'm going to do this is because I want you to just see this is a consistent theme. This isn't just like a one-off. This is something he's been saying recently, he's been saying in the past, and I'm sure he'll continue to say in the future, right? But by God's grace, he won't, right? Hopefully he'll get correction. Now, this is interesting. I'm going to start with this first video, and imagine this, right? Last week on the Sunday roast, I said, you know, yeah, this week we're going to be dealing with a Jewish topic, and this was the topic that I wanted to do, right? And during the week, I actually wanted to change the topic to something completely different. I wanted to go in a completely different direction. I wanted to deal with something to do with atheism. And it was only because I said on the end of last stream, you know what, we're going to be dealing with a Rabbinic Judaism topic. I said, you know what, I gave my word. I have to stick to my word. And it was interesting. I'll just put it like this. Because 2 days ago, I saw this today. 2 days ago, Rabbi Singer released a video about who is the Messiah. And I thought that was so interesting because I'm going to be talking today about what? How they rejected Jesus, many of the Jews, but have accepted many false messiahs since Jesus. And what do you know? A couple of days before today's live stream, Rabbi Tobiah Singer, the gift that keeps on giving to those of us who are defending Christianity, releases a video talking about the Messiah. Now, I'm just going to play a segment from this. I'm going to play less than a minute, but I want you to hear what he's saying here. This is someone asking about what's the Messiah going to be like? Is he going to be like Moses? And he says some crazy things. I'll just be real with you that I have to just skip over, because if you hear them and I hear them again, I'm going to feel just very compelled to speak about them. So this is a couple of minutes into the video. I'm going to play it for a few seconds, but just listen. Listen to what he says. He's talking about how they'll know about the Messiah. Listen to what he says. This is the first of 3 videos we're going to play before we jump into some quotes from that book. Moses delivered us. All right, give me 2 seconds. Let me just... All right, hold on. Live, guys, it's live. All right, all right, I'm gonna change headphones. This is what I'm gonna do. All right. Overhead. All right, cool. So let's do this. Give me 2 seconds. All right. All right, cool. We're good to go. All right. All right, you can see, you can hear. Listen.
An epic where the world will be transformed.
Let me go back. Let me just go back a little bit. All right.
God.
Cool.
So Moses delivered a single nation, but Mashiach will usher in an epic where the world will be transformed. The whole world will be saved. And who will trigger it? Not Mashiach, but the nation of Israel. How? By making movies in Hollywood? No. By teaching courses at Columbia and Harvard? Not at all. By running businesses in New York? No. By being successful in Wall Street? You're wasting your time. There are many Jews who do that. There are many Jews who are lawmakers in the United States, but that's not their job. The job of a Jew is to be a or lagoyim, a light to the nations. See Isaiah 42 verse 6, 49 verse 6. That's the role of the Jew. So the Mashiach,
the point he's basically making in that video, right? We're going to move to the next video. Is look, the Messiah, according to Rabbi Singer, is going to have a worldwide impact, which everybody believes, right? And he's talking about how the job of the Jew is to be a light to the nations. This is the kind of thing which speeds up or will bring about the Messianic age when the Messiah comes, etc. So the reason I'm playing this video and the next two videos is just for you to see quite clearly that Jews, Rabbinic Jews like Tavai Singer, will go out of their way to downplay Jesus's impact and downplay what Jesus did and downplay Jesus's radical transformation of the world as we know it today, and say, you know what, no, Jesus really didn't complete any of the signs of the Messiah, because we know this is what the Messianic age is going to look like, etc. And he speaks as if, you know what, this is all conclusive and all the Rabbinic Jews are in line with what he's talking about, when that's the furthest thing from the truth. But here you're getting a flavor of what he's saying. In the next video, you're going to see more, right? I'm going to play it again, less than a minute, about a minute, for you to see the same sort of thing. From this video, right? This was about a year ago. The last video I just showed you was 2 days ago. This is from about a year ago, where someone is calling in to talk to Rabbi Singer and is asking, well, Jesus was around, but when the temple was still standing. And because he was around when the temple was still standing, it was still a possibility for you to prove that you came from the line of David because of the scrolls that they kept in the temples, etc., in the temple. So a common Christian argument, or a common argument against the Messiah coming after the temple, is that you can't trace your line back to David. So somebody's calling in and asking the rabbi, well, how is the Jew going to be able to understand or see that this is the Messiah? How can we trace his lineage back to David? Listen to what he says here just for this clip. And again, he's pointing to what he's saying are clear signs as to how we know basically Jesus isn't the Messiah, but this is the Messiah. We'll know him when he comes. And you'll see, I'm showing you all of these different clips. So when I start showing you how Jews over and over again have rejected Christ, the true Messiah, the real Messiah, but accepted false messiahs over and over again, and the big problems with that. Even though people like Rabbi Singer will have you believe that this is just cut and dry and everybody knows exactly what to look for and how it's going to look like, etc. Listen to what he says.
When Mashiach comes, please God, it will be quickly in our time. Events will unfold. That will convey that the Messiah is here. First of all, Elijah the prophet will come introducing the Messiah. That's how the book of Malachi ends. Book of Malachi is really important here. Why? It's the end of the prophetic books. It's the last book in a Jewish Bible, in the Jewish prophetic part of the Bible. The Bible ends with the book of Malachi, and the Jewish Bible ends with the Second Chronicles. I'm not going to go into why, but it's the end of the prophetic segment of the Bible. And he says, behold, Elijah the prophet is coming, and that great, terrible day, Lord. And he's going to make everything straight, restoring families together, okay? So you have Elijah the prophet coming. You have the building of the temple. Building of the temple. How do you know? Because I say so? No, the Bible says so. Where? Like Ezekiel?
So let's stop it there, right? So again, you're seeing the mindset of popular rabbinic Jewish belief from people like Rabbi Singer, who are saying, look, we know Jesus was not the Messiah because there was no worldwide peace. So that proves Jesus wasn't the Messiah. He's saying things like, we know Jesus wasn't the Messiah because Elijah hasn't come yet. We know Jesus isn't the Messiah because the temple has not been rebuilt yet, right? And he's quoting passages in Ezekiel, which talk about where Ezekiel sees a temple, etc. And he's saying, these are clear signs that we know means that the Messiah cannot come or has not come yet. These are the signs, he's saying, that we know that the Messiah hasn't come yet because of all these signs that are so clear for everybody to see. This is what Rabbi Singer would have you believe. This is why you are going to be so shocked if you believe nonsense like what he's saying here, because that's what it is. When I start showing you some of the stuff I'm going to cover today. But again, John the Baptist, you could read the Gospels, Matthew chapter 3, Luke chapter 3, etc. Even going back to Luke chapter 1. John the Baptist, who Jesus says is Elijah who's come, right? He's not Elijah, he's in the spirit and power of Elijah to do what? To make straight the paths of the Lord, to prepare people for the Lord who's coming after him. It lines up. When you look at all this stuff and you look at Jesus, and even if you look back into history from where we are now, 2,000 years removed, John the Baptist comes on the scene. John the Baptist turns around and says, no, look, I'm not the special one. There's one coming after me who is preferred before me because he was before me. This is the one who's going to baptize you with the Spirit. He is the Messiah. He sees Jesus and he says, behold, this is the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. Echoing passages like Isaiah chapter 53, that even many rabbinic Jews know is about the Messiah. But Jesus also comes and says, look, repent. The kingdom of God is here. He says, you know what? He predicts his death. Look, I'm going to die. Just like Isaiah 53 says, I'm going to die for the people. So he dies, he's crucified. Before he dies, before he's crucified, he says, look, this temple is going to be destroyed. Now, the reason this is such perfect timing is because when you look at passages like Malachi chapter 3, when you look at passages like Haggai, the book of Haggai, when you look at passages like Daniel, the Lord, as it says in Malachi 3:1, was going to come to that temple, right? Before the glory of this second temple would be greater than the first. How is that? Because the Lord came to the temple and was coming to the temple, as Malachi says. You just heard the rabbi talk about Malachi as the end of the Old Testament, the end of the prophets. This is why Malachi is so significant. But a Jew like Rabbi Tavai Singer would have you believe all sorts of crazy stuff. It's so clear, so clear. If it was so clear to Jews that Jesus wasn't the Messiah, we wouldn't have a history I'm about to show you of countless examples of people accepting people as the Messiah. And this is why I'll continue to say this. Not just your everyday Jew, but the scholars, the key individuals. How does that happen if all of the signs are apparently so clear and there's no debate, there's no discussion? You see, it's crazy to me. You know what? I'll just put it like this. Anytime you hear a Jew, a rabbinic Jew like Tavai Singer, say stuff like, well, there's no such thing as a dying Messiah, just know straight away they're lying to you. You don't have to do much research into rabbinic Jewish tradition, rabbinic Jewish sources, looking at passages, looking at things like the Talmud, looking at things like the Targums, the interpretations, the paraphrases of the Old Testament, to see that this was a Jewish idea before it was a Christian idea. I'm going to go to the next clip, right, in the next video. Again, I'm just showing you, I'm building the case that over and over again, you will have people today like Rabbi Tovia Singer, popular Rabbinic Jews like him, who will say boldly and repeatedly, confidently, that Jesus is not the Messiah. It doesn't add up. All the signs don't add up. We know exactly what to look for. This is why the Jews, he says, never accepted Jesus. But as we're going to see today, they rejected Jesus in large part, but since that period have accepted false Messiah after false Messiah after false Messiah, even though the rabbi would have you believe that they know exactly what things are going to look like. History, my friend, is not with you, Mr. Singer. Let's look at this next video. Again, I'm going to play less than a minute. You're going to see the same sort of mindset. This is a similar example to the last one. This is, I believe, 5 minutes. Sorry, not 5 minutes. 5 months ago. Okay, well, it says it's about a year ago as well. So Rabbi Singer, again, talking about this sort of mindset, this mentality from a Rabbinic Jewish perspective. And again, I'm going to continue to say Rabbinic Judaism, because Rabbinic Judaism is totally different to the Judaism of the Old Testament. Radically different. And I want to continue to differentiate that so there's no confusion here. Let's listen to this.
The actions of the...
Messiah Mashiach, by what he's going to do. And in fact...
You'll know the Messiah, right, by what he does.
It tells us in the text, thank you for your question, if we look at Zechariah chapter 9, verse 10, all nations will serve him. That means if there's anybody doubting it, not so fast, that means he can't be Mashiach. The whole point of Mashiach is the whole world will serve him, Daniel chapter 7, verse 14. Gosh, if Christians knew Daniel 7:14 as well as they knew Daniel 7:13, we might not be in this much trouble, would we? And
you know the crazy thing about what he's actually saying here is, you got 10 seconds left. Let him cook.
It's a good circular thing. When the true Mashiach comes, everyone knows. Now you ask, how will they know? How will they know? Because the whole world will be changed.
All right. So we've set the foundation. We've laid the foundation. You've heard it from popular Rabbinic Jew Tovia Singer. I don't have a personal problem with Rabbi Singer, but I like to use him because he's well respected in the Rabbinic Jewish circles. So at least if we listen to him and hear what he has to say, it's representative of those sorts of ideas, right? But notice he's talking like it's so funny. He mentioned Daniel 7, and he says, "Look, if Christians knew Daniel 7:14 as much as they knew Daniel 7:13, we wouldn't have a problem here." But before he mentioned Daniel 7:14, he mentioned Zechariah chapter 9, verse 10. And I could just simply reverse it to him and say, well, if Rabbinic Jews knew Zechariah 9:10 as much as they knew, if Rabbinic Jews knew Zechariah 9:9, which talks about the king coming lowly, humbly, riding a donkey, as much as they knew Zechariah 9:10, we wouldn't have this problem. Because again, Rabbi Singer wants you to believe that the majority of Jews are all unified. They're united in this understanding of the Messiah. But you only have to read a few passages in the Talmud, for example, which is all intents and purposes on equal footing, right? With the Bible, right? To see that they're debating in the Talmud. Why does the Bible say the Messiah is going to come this way? Humbly, Zechariah 9:9. But why does it also say the Messiah is going to come ruling, coming with the clouds? Daniel chapter 7. Why does it say these two things? They're contradictory. They're not the same. Why does it say these two things? It says these two things because when you look at the whole Bible in totality and in context, you can't escape the fact that the Messiah seems to have two lines. What do I mean by that? Well, there seems to be a line where there's death and there's what seems to be a failure, which isn't really a failure. And there also seems to be a line for the Messiah in the Bible where he is ruling and reigning. So how do you account for that? Well, the Rabbinic Jews have their different ideas. Obviously, the Christian view is that Jesus came the first time as a sacrifice for mankind. And we're living in the aftermath, the byproduct of Jesus' sacrifice 2,000 years ago, 2,000 years later. So the world we live in today has been shaped and molded based on what Jesus did in the first century, 2,000 years ago. That is the radical moment in history which has changed everything. This is why the world is the way in which it is today. But Jesus said he's coming again. This lines up with the Old Testament. But as you've seen, no, Jesus can't be the Messiah because the temple is not rebuilt. Because there isn't this worldwide peace. There isn't everyone serving the Messiah. Now think about it. When we look at Jesus and Jesus' impact, it's undeniable what Jesus has done to the world. It's undeniable. Only someone who's been living under a rock and doesn't know basic history will disagree and say, no, Jesus isn't the radical event in history. Everything points to Jesus. The time points to Jesus. But Singer will have you believe that no. He was just this false Messiah and that's it. Well, why is what Jesus done been so impactful since then, and it continues to be impactful, not only in Israel, but all around the world? All around the world. But the other people we're going to see are totally different. Now, like I said, right, I thought about doing this live stream a couple of weeks ago, and it reminded me of when I read this book right here called The Messiah Text. This is written by a Jewish scholar, Dr. Raphael Patai, right? And he wrote this book, and basically the subheadline of this book sums it up: Jewish legends of 3,000 years. So this book says it covers a history of 3,000 years of Jewish beliefs, Jewish ideas, Jewish thoughts, etc. Now, what I'm going to cover and talk about in today's live stream, I didn't even buy this book for. This was one of those icing on the cake moments when you're reading through a book and you're like, yeah, this is what I wanted. That was what I wanted. And you're just like, boom, everything just is shattered because it's like, whoa, I was not expecting this. These are the kind of things. I did a live stream a few weeks back about another Sunday roast about what the Trinity in the Old Testament. We talked about another book, and one of the things I talked about I mentioned in that book was where the author of the book is talking about in his introduction. He's going around teaching these concepts. What concepts was he teaching? He's teaching these ideas in his upcoming book, that this idea of these two persons, father and son, or father and wisdom, right? This is not a Christian invention. This is something that the Jews believed widespread before the time of Christianity, during the time of Christianity, and after the time of Christianity. And he says, he's going around teaching this, and he's in Israel and he's teaching this concept, and a famous Jewish scholar turns around him and says to him, you need to seriously think about releasing this book. Because if you release this book, it's going to have serious ramifications, not only now, but into the future. That was the book Borderlines by Dr. Daniel Boyarin, another Jew, right? Who's exposing the history that Rabbinic Jews, a lot of them don't want you to know as Christians, especially. So when I read this a few years ago, like I said, I'll say it again, I was blown away. Now, let me just do this, right? I'm going to walk you through some pictures. Now, this is the timeline I drew. We're gonna come back to this at some point in the future, right? In today's live stream. But I'll describe everything as well. But notice, I'm gonna start. This is in the introduction, in the introductory pages. I believe this is in the preface, what I'm gonna show you first. We're just gonna read some quotes. And I want you to think about everything you heard the rabbi say. We know conclusively these are the things that need to happen before the Messiah shows up. And it's apparently so conclusive that they will never be fooled by people like Jesus. Now, for us looking back 2,000 years, we could look at the impact that Jesus had, right? That impact gets bigger and bigger even as time goes on. We could look back and be like, yeah, it's quite clear now why people would believe that Jesus is the Messiah. It gets clearer as more and more time goes on. Because what is it about this individual that his impact continues to last hundreds and then thousands of years from that moment? But then we look at some of the other individuals that I'm going to show you, and it's like, well, the Jews believed this was the Messiah, but they didn't believe Jesus was the Messiah. Make it make sense. All right. So, according to Rabbi Singer, this is easy to ascertain. Now, look at this. This is from page 40 in the preface, right? And listen to what he says here. This is again from this book, The Messiah Texts. Now, let's just walk through this step by step. So, as you can see here, it says, so much for the members of the Jewish intellectual elite and their messianic calculations. In this part, he's basically talking about how all these different religious scholars, basically, just in simple terms, they're doing all these fanciful calculations. It's kind of like how today you have loads of people, like Christians included, who are saying, look, the rapture is going to happen on this day. Jesus is coming back on this day. It's the same sort of thing that he's talking about here in regards to the Messiah coming, right? And then he says, their popular counterpart was the readiness of the masses. This is key. He's basically saying here, it wasn't only the scholars, it was the masses, most of the people who were so ready to give credence, to believe in any imposter or self-deluded dreamer who claimed to be the Messiah. But Rabbi Singer says that everybody who's a Jew, Rabbi Singer says, we know what the Messiah is going to look like. We know what the times of Messiah is going to be like. This is why we could reject Jesus so easily. But how, pray tell, could it be so clear and so easy to reject Jesus, but somehow Jewish scholars after the time of Jesus and many of the people are, as the book says here, very happy and willing to accept many of these people who claim to be the Messiah. Jesus said it. Many will come in my name saying they're the Christ. Don't believe them. They're false. It says in the book, the list of these pseudo messiahs is as long as that of the calculators of the end. So he's saying, as many people as there are who are doing their calculations and saying, yes, this is when the end of the world is going to come. This is when the Messiah is going to come. There's just as many people who believed in these false messiahs. And you know the majority of those people he's talking about are Jews. But Rabbi Singer and other people like him will deceive you into thinking that Yeah, we rejected Jesus because he was so contradictory to the Old Testament. It was so easy to see there wasn't world peace, etc., etc., etc. Well, during these periods in time where this book is talking about, was there world peace? Of course there wasn't. But why did they accept these individuals as the Messiah? Because world peace isn't the only sign of the Messiah's arrival. And in fact, the better interpretation biblically would be that the world peace comes on his second arrival, not on his first. And the messianic movements they triggered punctuate Jewish history from when? From earliest times down to the 18th century. He's basically saying in simple terms, these beliefs from many of the Jews, and bear in mind, after the time of Jesus, when the temple was destroyed, the Jews were scattered all around the world. So I'm going to show you examples that he mentions in the book where it's talking about different parts of the world being captivated with false messiahs. This has happened from the earliest times. So from the beginning. And when I'm saying the beginning, for context today, I'm just talking about from the 1st century, right? From those times to the 18th century, basically 2,000 years, up until 200 years ago. And there's even been someone who's come after, about 20 years ago, who people believed was the Messiah as well. But look, what is that saying? You're hearing Rabbi Singer say, no, it was easy to reject Jesus as a Messiah, but we won't make the mistake of taking or believing in a false Messiah. But I've already shown you on the first example from this book today that there are many scholars and individuals who believed in false messiahs in all these different places. Now, it gets better for us as Christians, not for them. This is why we have to continue to walk in the truth, because the truth shall make you free. All right. This is now on page 43 of his introduction. Listen to what he says here. I've highlighted a piece of this text, but focus on where I'm reading, right? Just so we're all flowing together and nobody's left behind, right? So stay focused. Notice here, it says, the firmness of their belief was succinctly expressed in the credo formulated by Maimonides. We're going to talk about Maimonides again shortly, but Maimonides is one of the most famous Rabbinic Jews. I mentioned this in previous live stream. Arguably the most significant rabbi in Rabbinic tradition is Rabbi Akiva, 100 years after the time of Jesus. We'll talk about him shortly as well. Another famous rabbi is Rabbi Rashi, Rabbi Shlomo Yitzhaki. They call him Rashi. Now, he's significant. He's around the same time period as Maimonides, which is in the Middle Ages, so about 1100s, etc. And the reason Rashi is significant is because most people today, Rabbinic Jews that is, who read the Bible, will typically read the Bible with Rashi's notes, Rashi's commentary. So they are reading the Bible with Rashi's lenses, is the simple way to put this. They're reading it as Rashi would. Then you have also Rabbi Moses ben Maimon, Maimonides, right? Similar time period to Rashi, he's also top 3. Now, the reason Maimonides is significant because Maimonides created what we call today the 13 Articles of Faith. You have to believe the 13 Articles of Faith to be a Jew today. Now, one of them, as we're going to see here, is that you have to believe in the Messiah, that the Messiah is coming. So this is what he's talking about here in the book. So even though He tarries, the Messiah that is. Nevertheless, I shall wait for him every day, that he should come. Within a few years, the bitter experience was forgotten, and the next messianic pretender was given as much credence as his predecessors, was greeted with as much enthusiasm, and was able to plunge his contemporaries into the same kind of frenzied belief, manic activism, and abandoned recklessness. How can Rabbi Singer speak so confidently about how it's easy for the Jews to identify the Messiah when there's stuff like this in scholarship showcasing that these Jews, Rabbi Singer's forefathers, would look left, would look right, and would look all around for any individual, pretty much, who claimed to be the Messiah? He's basically saying here, they would forget about what happened previously, eventually, and then move on to the next one. They wouldn't learn the lesson. They wouldn't learn the lesson. Now notice, that isn't even the highlighted part in this section. Notice what I highlighted when I was reading it a few years ago. It says, from 1087, so about 1,000 years ago, to 1172, a short span of 85 years, Jewish history, Christian history, secular, atheist history, Muslim history, Buddhist history. What does that say? Jewish history. Tell us what Jewish history records, Dr. Patai. Records no less than 9 messianic movements. This isn't just, again, people who came on the scene and said, yeah, I'm the Messiah, follow me, and nobody listened. He says, which shook. I was talking earlier about, I'm reading this book a few years ago for completely different reasons, and I'm rocked, like, whoa, where did this come from? How have I never heard of this stuff? How have I never heard of this individual? I'll show you who that individual is shortly. This 85-year span, 1,000+ years after Jesus, shook the communities in such widely scattered places as where? Morocco, Africa, Spain, Europe, France, Byzantium, Turkey, Asia, Khazaria, Palestine, Babylonia, and Yemen. 8 messianic movements which shook all different parts of the world, Africa, Asia, Europe, in an 85-year window, 1,000 years after Jesus. Again, but people like Rabbi Singer will have you believe Jesus isn't the Messiah. It was so cut and dry. It was so clear to see. We wouldn't fall for somebody like Jesus. But in an 85-year window, they would fall for 9 different messianic movements in these different parts of the world, and actually believes that the Messiah has come back. What does it say? The number of men who, in the course of the long diaspora history, right, the scattered Jews, claim to be the Messiah is unknown. We don't even know how many people claim to be the Messiah, and cannot even be estimated. For those who left their traces in historical records can only be a fraction of the many more who arose, created a stir, that's significant, gathered a following, and then met a violent end or disappeared. Now, I forgot to mention this earlier, but it's evident, and it wouldn't be a surprise that as he's talking about this book, he mentions Jesus as well. as one of these charlatans, false messiahs. Now, when I read that, I was a bit shocked, to say the least, to a certain degree, right? He's not a Christian, right? He's a Jew. So I was still a bit shocked though, because to attach Jesus to these different examples, when we can clearly just look at the impact Jesus had, is a bit strange to me. But notice, it's unnumbered. There's so many. Now, we've talked about Jesus, we've talked about Maimonides a little bit, we've talked about the 8 false messianic movements. Now, this is who I want to spend the majority of today's session on. This is who the book says is the greatest messianic movement in all Jewish history. Now, if I ask this question, most of us, imagine if I said to you, what's the greatest messianic movement in Jewish history? We'd all probably put our hand up and say, yeah, I know this one, right? Jesus, right? Like it's quite clear that Jesus has had the biggest impact in Messianic history. But he's not talking about Jesus in this section. He's talking about an individual that most Christians have probably never heard of. Most people who are not Jewish have probably never heard of. And if you're a Jew and you've heard about this, it's probably, I would say, not the majority. And in the book, he talks about why that potentially is. But one should think, with people like Rabbi Singer, as I've shown you, speaking of how it's so clear from a Jewish perspective, right? We believe as Christians, it's very clear from a Christian perspective, and time has borne out the truth, right? Jesus came, John the Baptist prepared his way, as it says in Isaiah 40 and Malachi chapter 3, one will come before the Lord and prepare his way. He's predicting the destruction of the temple. He's predicting his death and his resurrection. The resurrection is the most likeliest option when you look at the evidence of what's actually happened. Why would the disciples radically change their mindsets, their views, for a lie, for something they didn't believe? That doesn't make sense. The simplest solution to that equation is that Jesus did rise from the dead and was shown to be the Messiah. Now, up until this point, we've covered about 1,500 years of history. Now notice what he says here. He says, the next century witnessed the greatest messianic movement in all Jewish history. Shabbatai Zevi. Just let me know in the chat section. Have you ever heard of this individual? Shabbatai Zevi. Zevi was a Sephardi Jew. A Sephardic Jew. Like, for those of you who don't know, the Sephardic Jews are like, they're like the creme de la creme. Like, if you want to be a Jew, you want to be Sephardic. I kid you not. I already said this multiple times. I was blown away reading this a few years back. You're going to see you're going to see clearly. You're going to be blown away. I'll just put it like this. When I show you some of these things, you're going to be thinking to yourself, you actually can't make this up. You can't make this up. I was literally reading this book, reading about this guy, and thinking to myself, oh wow, they really believed this guy was the Messiah. And they really believed in this guy as the Messiah so much that it's being classified as the greatest messianic movement in Jewish history. But it's very clear to me how the Bible talks about the Jews in large part have been blinded. Because you'd have to be blinded to believe in someone like this as the Messiah. It's so obvious. But then I caught myself and said, well, it's obvious for a Christian. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's obvious for a Jew who's rejected Jesus as the Messiah, who's been raised in an environment to reject Jesus as the Messiah, and to classify Jesus as some heretic, some charlatan, some false Messiah. Shabbatai Zevi, a Sephardi Jew who was born in Smyrna, modern day Turkey, in 1626. He was born on the 9th of Ab, apparently. And this is apparently the traditional date of the birth of the Messiah, ever since early Talmudic times. So this individual, Shabbatai Zevi, comes on the scene, and he's a Sephardic Jew, right? So, like, kudos to him, right? He's of that special ilk, apparently. He's born on the day which is traditionally the day that the Messiah will be born. So he says, look, yeah, I'm born on the day the Messiah is born. Now, notice what it says next, because this is where you begin to scratch your head. And you're going to scratch your head even more so when you think about what Rabbi Singer has been talking about in those videos, about how it's so clear Jesus wasn't the Messiah, but Jews are so in the know, they wouldn't be tricked to fall for somebody like Jesus. But these individuals that they're falling for can't even lick Jesus's boots. And I'm saying that from a messianic claim perspective. Jesus has so much stuff going for him in line with him being the Messiah. Most of these individuals, especially this individual, Shabbatai Zevi, who's the greatest example of a messianic movement in history, it's as clear as day. Listen to what it says next. This individual, Shabbatai Zevi, he suffered from manic depressive states. Who does that remind you of? Who is a holy man, apparently, who came with a message of, oh, he's special, he's sent by God, but had or was known for manic depressive states? Wanted to throw himself off a cliff many times. Wanted to die on many different occasions. Not a one-off, consecutively. Who does that remind you of? He was suffering from manic depressive states. The guy who got revelation and said the devil was speaking to him. He believed it was the devil speaking to him. This is who it should remind you of. The Prophet of Islam. Very similar. But this individual, Shabbatai Zevi, born in 1626, was suffering from manic depressive states. He was majorly depressed. It says he immersed himself in the study of the Kabbalah, Jewish mysticism. He found himself going deep into study into Jewish mysticism. That's what study of the Kabbalah is. And it said, and after the horrors of the Chimoniki massacres in 1648 to 1649, he became convinced he was the Messiah. So he's this guy, he comes on the scene. Apparently he's born on the traditional day of the Messiah, the day the Messiah will be born. He's having these manic depressive states. He's just depressed. This is the kind of individual that they'll put on antidepressants today and say, you know what, you need to chill out. He immerses himself in study of the Kabbalah, Jewish mysticism. And there's these massacres. And then from that point on, he's convinced himself that he's the Messiah. Now, if his manic depression was not enough to ring alarm bells, look at what it says next. In 1662, talk about breadcrumbs and clues. After having twice married and immediately divorced his brides, he married in Cairo a young woman named Sarah, who had survived the Polish massacres as a child, grown up to live a dissolute life, and let it be known that she was destined to become the wife of the Messiah. Now, you have a guy named Shabbatai Zevi who says and is professed that he's born on the birthday of the Messiah. He's married twice and gets divorced from both of those women and then marries another woman. He marries a woman who says she's destined to become the Messiah. Now, I don't know if it's because he had been saying at this point he's the Messiah, so this is just how she duped him into marrying her, or if it's the opposite. But this is crazy. Notice what it says next. The shades of David Rubini briefly flitted across the scene in the form of rumors that a Jewish army was ready to march out of the Arabian desert to conquer Palestine. Okay. So he comes on the scene. There's more. There's more. The next image I'm going to show you, photo I'm going to show you is of what's right under this. But imagine what we know at this point about Shabbatai Zevi, which, again, as it's highlighted up here, the greatest messianic movement in all of Jewish history. The Jews fell for a guy like this as the Messiah in mass. This wasn't some local situation. This was mass, as I'm going to show you. But people like Rabbi Singer want you to believe that they could reject Jesus as the Messiah and confidently do it, according to Rabbi Singer, but accept someone like Shabbatai Zevi and all these other individuals as people who were the Messiah. I said it gets worse. This individual has manic depressive attacks. He's in a manic depressive state, chronic depression. He's married two women and immediately divorced them. Another red flag. And he's married this third woman who's apparently destined to marry the Messiah. It gets worse. Rabbi Singer loves to say that people like Jesus, or more specifically, people like Paul, who Jesus sent out as an apostle, rejected the law or didn't walk according to the law. And this was a red flag. But tell me why it wasn't a red flag for somebody like Shabbatai Zevi. Notice what it says. Shabbatai Zevi's antinomian, mean he's rebel. Basically, he's against the law. He's rebel acts. But even more so, this is how he got them. His personal beauty and extraordinary charm made people accept his messianic pretensions unquestioningly, and the popular enthusiasm he evoked was unprecedented. This guy had looks, and that is how he gamed them. They didn't care or focus on the fact he was in chronic depression, They didn't focus on the fact he married 2 women and immediately divorced them, and they married a third. They didn't focus on the fact that he was a rebel. He didn't follow the laws. They didn't focus on the fact that all he had was apparently good looks and charisma. Do you know why I continue to say that you can't be captivated by how somebody delivers a message? The reason I say that is because when you are so focused on, oh, he speaks so well, or she says it so wisely, they are going to deceive you. It's not about how good somebody delivers a message. It's not about the charisma or the boldness or the clarity they speak in. It's about, is what is being said the truth or not? That's all that matters. That's what matters most, at least. He was a rebel, but he was good looking and he had charisma. So people followed him and believed his messianic claims unquestioningly. It was unprecedented. You mean to tell us, Rabbi Singer, that it was easy to snuff out somebody like Jesus, who's had this great impact the 2,000 years following his death, like he said he would. But somehow, Shabbatai Zevi was believed in an unprecedented way. That's just him saying in another way, this was the greatest movement in Jewish history. There was nothing like this. Unprecedented. Nothing like this. Now, he goes further, and what does he say? Why was it unprecedented? Well, he says his fame, Zevi's fame that is, look at that, rapidly. His fame spread fast. Where did it spread fast? Beyond the borders of the Ottoman realm. So bear in mind, this is the 1620s, this is like the 1640s, 1650s. This is Islam time, basically. Because Islam from about 700s, right, 800s, then 750, them periods in time, began taking large realms of land and compelling all these people they're conquering to embrace Islam or die, right? Receive the religion of Islam or pay your tax, your dhimmi tax, which shows that you're subservient, or you will die. Those are the options. His fame spread far and wide rapidly beyond Muslim territory. So Muslim's territory was at this time all the way to Morocco, past Morocco to places like Portugal and Spain. That was like the edge heading into Europe, and obviously in the other direction in Asia, and obviously central in Arabia, etc. His fame spread beyond that. Now this is where it gets really interesting. If you thought everything I'd said to you so far is mind-blowing about how they could fall for such a antichrist, what you're going to see in a moment is going to blow your mind, I'm telling you. If you thought what I've shown you so far was red flags, you're going to get the biggest red flag of them all in a moment. It says, by 1665, the whole diaspora. Some of you are going to catch what I'm talking about already. You're going to catch it. But by 1665, the whole diaspora, what does that mean? That means the Jews everywhere, north of Israel, south of Israel, east of Israel, west of Israel, everywhere was what? Under his spell. Bear in mind, he was a rebel, but it was because he looked good and had charm. Everywhere was under his spell. From Poland. This guy's in the Middle East. He comes from Smyrna. He's around Israel, but he's reaching people in Poland, in Europe. From Poland, emissaries were sent to pay him homage. This is like when you read in the Gospels of Matthew, in Matthew chapter 2, the wise men come from the east. They come from the east, probably from somewhere like Babylon, modern day Iraq, and they come to Israel and they come to see Jesus. And they bring him gold and frankincense and myrrh. And they honor him as the King of the Jews. This is what it's like, what we're reading here. From Poland, these groups of people were paying him, coming to and paying him homage. And in Holland, entire Jewish communities liquidated. They sold all their possessions and waited their positions and waited for his word in the harbor to set sail for the Holy Land. That's what it's going to say. So this guy with good looks and a bit of charisma had a whole diaspora under his spell. But Rabbi Singer, as you heard today, would have you believe that it's so easy for Jews to know who the Messiah is. But since the time of Jesus, they rejected Jesus as the Messiah. But since that period in time, have continued to miss the mark. Now, this is what I'm gonna do. No, I'm not. I was gonna show you the timeline, but the timeline will give it away. So look, this is what I'm gonna do. The moment you realize, put it in the chat. The moment you realize, put it in the chat. This is the next page. And bear in mind, this is still in the introduction. This is not even this is not even like the main corpus of his book here. This is just stuff he's laying out in the introduction. Look at what he says on the next page. Remember I said it says Holy Land, right? It was going to say Holy Land. He had people waiting in the Holy Land, waiting by the shore, in their countries in Europe, waiting for word to send them to come to the Holy Land to take over the Arabs who were in power then. Now, you can't make this up. As the Messianic year of 1666 drew nigh, as the year (1666). This is 2 comments. This is just for the record, right? This is not 1 comment. This is 2 comments. She caught it. I'm pretty sure most Christians caught it right away when they saw this. I'll put it back up. As the Messianic year of 1666 drew nigh, 1666 drew nigh. Now, I'm reading this at this point. Imagine the stuff I've shown you already on the previous pages. I'm reading this like, how have I never heard of this guy? I've never heard of this guy. I'm thinking to myself, wait, this guy had this massive impact. How do Christians never not know about this? And I'm thinking to myself, well, I wasn't necessarily thinking about Rabbi Singer at the time, even though I think at that time I was already engaging with Rabbi Singer's videos and other people, but I'm thinking to myself, but the Jews think it's so easy to pinpoint the Messiah, but how are all these individuals over time having such an impact? Then we get to Zevi, and it's like, okay, this is apparently the biggest guy, but I've never heard of this guy. And we're seeing red flag after red flag after red flag after red flag. And it's like, how did they miss it? How are they not realizing this? And then (666), and I'm like, no, you can't make this up. You really cannot make this up. You're telling me that in the year 1666, there was an individual who was claimed to be the Messiah and had the greatest impact in Jewish history. This must be a joke, right? This is what I was thinking. This must be a joke. This must be a joke. Because surely the Jews know about the number of the beast. 666 in Revelation. Surely they know. Even though they're not Christians, even though they may not even read the New Testament like devotionally like a Christian does. Surely they must know about 666, the mark of the beast. And I don't even care if you are of the opinion who believe that it's not 666 in Revelation, it's 616. That doesn't even matter. Because 666 is popular enough for people to know. But it just makes sense, doesn't it? 1666. You have someone who's claimed to be the Messiah. The epitome of antichrist, of devilish, demonic behavior. Of course the devil will do something like this. And this is what I was saying earlier. I'm reading this, thinking to myself, well, they really must be blind. Like, those passages in the New Testament just come to light in a whole new way. They've been blinded until the fullness of the Gentiles coming. Darkness has hit Israel in part because they rejected the Messiah. This is what Jesus was talking about. He's weeping over Jerusalem and saying, it would have been so good for you if you accepted your Messiah. If only you knew the peace that was going to come for you if you accepted me. But until you say, blessed is he that comes in the name of the Lord, it's over for you. It's on tops for you. This is how they're able to fall for deceptions like this. The year 1666, another thing that hit me was, this is only like 400 years ago. So as I'm thinking, like, how have I never heard of this guy? Like, I'm like, I get it, yes, but I'm like, why don't Jews talk about this guy? Like, why is it rare? Like, you would think something like this would be very popular, but it isn't. You have to go digging, looking to find this stuff. In 1666, Shabbatai Zevi announced that he would go to Constantinople, who's going to Turkey, and he's going to depose the Sultan. I mentioned earlier that these are time periods where Islam is ruling these regions of the world. And he's going to assume the rule over the Ottoman Empire. So he's going to wipe out Islam, is basically what he's saying. Among whose many far-flung dependencies was Palestine, the Holy Land. So at this point in time, Israel is under Islamic occupation. He sailed from Smyrna to Constantinople. But on February 6, 1666, it's almost like if you missed it here, God is spelling it out for you nice and clear. 6, according to Hebrew, to Jewish thinking as well, is the number of man, right? 6, February 6th, 666. I remember, no, I'm not even going to mention that. Maybe I'll mention that another time. June 6, 2006. I'll mention that another time. On February 6th, 1666, his ship was intercepted. Surprise, surprise. He was arrested and confined to the fortress of Gallipoli, where he managed to hold court in the grandest style for several months. And now it makes sense, obviously, right? He's apprehended and he's holding court. He's presenting and defending himself for months and months. And it makes sense because it's already been mentioned in the book that he's good looking and he's charismatic. So he can charm people. So he's doing his thing. He's already spoken loudly. Yeah, I'm going to go and depose the Sultan, right? Which is basically like committing treason. He says this, he boards a ship and goes to Constantinople and they arrest him, which obviously they're going to do because it's like, imagine somebody saying today, I'm going to wipe out President Trump or President Biden, something like that. Or I'm going to wipe out the Queen of England. They would be arrested immediately. They get this guy on ship. It's even a surprise that he made it to the ship. It's a good point. Jewish scholars love numerology, right? They call it gematria. So it seems they really were under his spell. And it is true. Because I don't even think you have to be in like a New Testament reader to see like these red flags. This is why I'm highlighting all of the different red flags. The 666 to me is just icing on the cake. But they fell for this hook, line and sinker. It's the same way even when I think about it now, the Bible talks about how he will deceive, it says it in Daniel, with flattery. You have to be careful about flattery. Now notice what it says next. I'm just going to say this again. All right, cool. The 666 for me was the icing on the cake. But for some of you, what I'm going to share with you after this paragraph is even worse. So brace yourself. If you thought this was bad, it gets worse. You can't make this up. Before we get to that though, finally, his behavior incurred the wrath of the Sublime Porte. And on September 16, there's that number 6 again, of the same year, he was brought before the divan and given the choice between what? Immediate death and conversion to Islam. I'm sick of you, Mr. Zevi. You better choose Islam or die right now. Now, this is what's interesting. Choose Islam or immediate death. Now, I already mentioned at the start of today's live stream, right? You got passages like Isaiah 53, which talk about the death of the Messiah. Psalm 22. Zechariah 12:10. They will look on me whom they've pierced. Multiple passages in the Old Testament prepare us for a dying Messiah, who the Jews typically will call today Messiah ben Joseph, the Messiah son of Joseph. You have the Messiah, son of Joseph, and the Messiah, son of David. This is a typical situation to handle, right? To handle the two lines that I talked about earlier. Now, choose Islam or die. This is these are the options given to the individual Shabbatai Zevi, who's responsible for the greatest messianic movement, unprecedented effect in Jewish history. When Jesus was before Pilate, he said, "My kingdom is not of this world." When Jesus was in the Garden of Gethsemane, when they came to arrest him, when Judas betrayed him with a kiss, he said, "Relax, guys. I could send 12, I could call for 12 legions of angels. 20 plus thousand angels. I could call for them right now. But that's not what I'm going to do. This is what I've come here for. To lay my life down for the people, so that all that believe in me, all that trust in me, all that look to the cross will not perish but will have everlasting life." Look at what this Antichrist did. Shabbatai Zevi chose the latter alternative. And for those of you who don't remember what the latter alternative was, it was die immediately or choose Islam. The latter was to choose Islam. And this serpent chose to embrace Islam. This is the Messiah that they believed in. Far and wide, across Europe, across Africa, across Asia, in all these different places. But he put forward a mystical explanation. Isn't this what all false prophets do? All false groups, they make up these fanciful tales. Nobody would be deceived to believe Jesus is the Messiah. We know how to find the Messiah. Did any of these individuals, do you hear anything about, oh, you know what, the temple isn't built yet? There's not world peace. Do you see any of this here? This history shows you alone that the things that Rabbi Singer is saying are either blatant lies and deception, or he's just totally ignorant to history. Zevi reinterpreted this situation of his apostasy. You see, that's what it was. He apostatized. The Messiah apparently apostatized. His conversion to Islam, he says, which he compared it with degradation and suffering. Although in reality, he received a respectable stipend from the Sultan. You see, he's going around saying, this is all part of the plan for me to suffer. But the Sultan was treating him very nicely. He says it was a form of atonement for Israel. This was in accordance with the older Jewish legend, which held that prior to his coming, the Messiah must voluntarily undertake sufferings in order to ease the sufferings of Israel. Now, notice, according to old Jewish legend, the Messiah would suffer first. So when people like Rabbi Singer will try and deceive you into thinking, oh, no, like the suffering Messiah, that's just something Christians invented or made up. That's not true. This goes back to beyond old Jewish legend. It goes back before that. The new twist Shabbatai Zevi gave to this old Messiah legend proved acceptable to some of his followers. Imagine, in the year 1666, this demon-inspired man who's put a spell on the whole of the diaspora of Jews embraced Islam instead of dying, and his charm is that effective, he's still convincing some of his followers that this is all part of the plan. This is why you need to be extremely careful when it comes to this sort of stuff. Because just like the devil in the Garden of Eden, the devil is slippery. In further explanation of his apostasy, both Shabbatai and his followers adduced certain Kabbalistic tenets to the effect that he had to descend into the impure realm of the husks in order to redeem the scattered sparks of the divine light entrapped by them. So, in simple terms, they're making up these claims that, look, you know what? He needs to go down and down and down and down before he comes up again. But Singer would have you believe that that's all a myth. Imagine the success of this ingenious mythical theological reinterpretation of the disconfirmation of Shabbatai Zevi's mission can be gauged by the fact that after his death in 1676, a sect of Muslim Shabbatians, the so-called Donama, survived until the 19th century. Simply put, he was so convincing, even after he died, he had a following for 300 more years. They believed him. Now, he's going to tell you in the next picture I've got here how someone like Shabbatai Zevi could come on the scene, wreak so much havoc, but then most people don't know about him and stuff like this. Before I do that, we're gonna look at that. We're gonna go to the timeline now, right? Because we've covered all of these key parts, and I wanted to show this to you from a different angle. Because I've shown you Rabbi Singer say, like, you know what, it's so clear for us. And I've shown you excerpts from this book. Again, these quotes are from this book, the Messiah texts, which I read a few years ago, and I was left gobsmacked at many of the stuff in the book that I didn't buy the book for, but also stuff like this about Shabbatai Zevi and other individuals who have bewitched the Jewish people. I want to show you this from a different angle. So this is the timeline I drew up earlier. And yes, I know I need to clean my whiteboard, but notice we've got just some key stuff here. This is because I want you to see this from a different angle, from a timeline in a picture format, so you to see what Rabbi Singer wants you to believe and people like him. So this is the year 0, right? 2,000 years ago. Then we've got the year 2000, right? Which is 24 years ago. Then we've got the year 1500, we've got the year 1000, we've got the year 500, etc. Right? So, as you heard Rabbi Singer say earlier, John the Baptist has to come on the scene. Or sorry, the Elijah has to come on the scene. And the Bible says that John the Baptist was Elijah, who came with the spirit and power of Elijah to prepare for Jesus. Now, in the year 33, and thereabouts, right? That's when Jesus was crucified. Jesus, before his death, prophesies and says, you see this temple in Matthew 25, for example, and other passages, everything you're going to see here is going to be destroyed. Just wait. That came to pass about 40 years later in the year 70. And this is just a depiction I drew of just the temple being destroyed. There's all your smoke, and there's all the smoke ascending, and there's all the bricks and the temple destroyed, laid out. Not one piece is going to be left on another, right? Now, so many convincing proofs over the last 2,000 years, looking back, why Jesus is a great example of the Messiah. But 100 years after the fact, 100 years after Jesus, you have this individual called Bar Kokhba. He leads a revolt, he's successful for a season, and then he's killed in battle. But the reason this is significant is because Rabbi Singer, again, no, we won't fall for these traps. Rabbi Akiva, I mentioned him earlier. Rabbi Akiva believed that Bar Kokhba was the Messiah. The temple wasn't rebuilt. There wasn't world peace. They were in the midst of a war. But Rabbi Akiva, the most significant rabbi in Jewish history, in rabbinic history, believed that Bar Kokhba was the Messiah. In 1000, I read earlier to you about what 1087 to 1172, in that 85-year window, 9 examples of messianic movements who rocked different parts: Spain, Morocco, the Khazars, all these different places. And then Maimonides. Now, Maimonides is interesting because what did I say? He's a top 3. Akiva, Rashi, and Maimonides. In the book, he talks about how Maimonides, for the most part, rejects putting dates on when the Messiah is going to come and all these different kind of stuff. But in his Yemenite letter, he tells this old tradition where he basically gives into date setting, and he sets dates. And he sets the date of 1210. Now, he died in 1204. So 6 years before his apparent date that he mentioned happened, he died. And again, 400 years ago, about 400 years ago, the individual we're speaking about today, in the year 1666, Shabbatai Zevi came on the scene. 1600 years after Jesus. And mass people all around the world believed in him as the Messiah and were waiting by the shore to follow his commands. But Rabbi Singh would have you believe that Jesus being crucified here, the temple being destroyed right after, and the implications of books like Daniel and Haggai and Malachi and Isaiah have in regards to this are nothing. But then the Jews are falling for people like Bar Kokhba, for these individuals, these groups here, and the crescendo of false messiahs. Somebody like Shabbatai Zevi, 1600 years after Jesus. But none of these individuals said, well, we have to see the new temple. We have to see this, we have to see that. No, they just believe them. And even, like I mentioned previously, about 30 years ago, he's known as the Rebbe. Again, people believe he was the Messiah. This is the timeline. You can look at this from a completely different perspective and see that over time, these individuals that are being raised up as messiahs are nowhere near the impact, have nowhere near the long-lasting effect, have nowhere near the transformational power and capabilities that Jesus did, coming back from the first century. But Rabbi Singer, again, will have you believe that no, these individuals, these Jews who know the Torah, who know the scriptures, will never fall for these. How is people like Rabbi Akiva falling for this? Maimonides telling old traditions about when the Messiah is going to show up, the end of the world, etc. How is this happening if it's so easy from a Jewish perspective to see these things? No. It's just a clear example of how these individuals have been blinded because they rejected their Messiah in large part. Until they acknowledge him, they will continue to be in this state of blindness. Now, after talking about Shabbatai Zevi in this part, notice what he says next. He says, for the rest of the Jewish world, the shock of Shabbatai Zevi's apostasy was profound. So you have this sect of people who say, no, they buy hook, line and sinker this reinterpretation from Shabbatai Zevi. But for everybody else who was awake enough to realize, no, the gig is up, the apostasy was profound. Little is known about what the common people felt, but the rabbis, in their wisdom, what did they decide? Decided on a course which they thought was most likely to heal the wounds in the nation's psyche. These are the kind of things Rabbinic Jews, in their wisdom, don't want you to know about. And on the next page, as it continues, it shows you the course of action that they took. This is what they did. The course of action they took, which was minimizing what had happened and of covering it with the veils of silence and disregard. They redacted it. We're going to minimize what happened. We're going to cover it up. And we're going to be silent about it. And we're going to disregard it. This is why most Christians don't know about these individuals. And this is why most Rabbinic Jews today probably don't know about these individuals. And if they do, they probably don't want to talk about it. The strategy succeeded, they say. Because within 100 years, Judaism produced a new great religious movement. That of Hasidism, the pious ones, in which messianic expectations were tamed, were kept in their place, and never again allowed to get out of hand. You see? This is why Rabbi Singer today, in his videos, and other Rabbinic Jews like him, will speak so boldly and confidently that they will not be duped into believing the Messiah. Because this is the stream of information they've been raised under. Temper your expectations about the Messiah. Act as if we know what we're doing. Act as if we're not blind. Act as if we haven't been deceived. The Christians, the whole world is deceived by people like Jesus, but not us. We know what we're doing. This is exactly the strategy they had. We will deceive the people. We will even deceive our own people and be silent and quiet about it, because that's the rabbinic wisdom. Thanks for tuning in, Lucian. Following Rabbinic Judaism is like being between the anvil and the hammer. There's nowhere to go. And whatever happens, it's going to be danger. The problem with lies is, when you lie, it's eventually going to come out. A lie is but for a moment, but the lip of truth will endure forever. That's what it says in Proverbs. They minimized what happened. Minimized, covered, silence, and disregard. No. We don't fall for those things. We know when the Messiah is coming. Doesn't it sound like Rabbi Tavares here today? It'd be interesting to know whether he knows about this stuff and just acts, or if he's just ignorant. It'd be interesting. But within 100 years, just as we saw, I showed you previously, there was that 85-year window where they continued to believe lie after lie after lie, false Messiah after false Messiah after false Messiah. Within 100 years, time went of them just saying over and over again, over and over and over and over again, there's nothing to see here. Don't believe in Jesus as the Messiah. It's for them to look back and say, wow, we totally missed it. Shabbatai Zevi was like the crescendo of just false messiahs. Why not look back at Jesus and say, well, all these people that have come after him have totally missed the mark. But Jesus continues to have this long-lasting impact. That's all they had to do, acknowledge him. But they didn't. They chose rabbinic wisdom to conceal and to hide and to cover up. Now, when you now get into the book, he's got a section when he's talking about different messiahs, and he talks about another section about Shabbatai Zevi. Now, there's more. There's more. Look what it says here. In the year 1665, on the 22nd of Kislev, that's basically November, December today for us, based on the Jewish calendar, rumors came from the east. This is where he's now talking specifically about Shabbatai Zevi. Rumors came from the corners of the east, from Egypt and her neighbors, that in Gaza, which is near Jerusalem, a prophet arose. This is how Shabbatai Zevi was able to deceive loads of people because of stuff like this, announcing good tidings and salvation. They said, now before I even continue, I'm thinking as I'm reading this, I'm thinking about what Rabbi Singer was saying in the videos I showed you earlier about John the Baptist coming. This is just the framework of what was going on here. This prophet came on the scene. His name was Nathan, if I remember correctly. And he's pointing everybody to Shabbatai Zevi. They said, the prophet, about a scholar whose name is Shabbatai Zevi, of the inhabitants of Izmar, Smyrna, who sojourned there in Jerusalem, that he was the Messiah of the God of Jacob, and that within a year and a few months he would take the kingship from the hand of the Togar, the Sultan, not with an army and not by force, but the king, the Togar himself, would place the royal crown on his head. So Zevi had this prophet coming before him and preparing the way for him. This is the Messiah of the God of Jacob. Within a year's time, he's going to change the world. Now, the crazy thing about this is people believed him. Now, one thing I didn't mention to you, Shabbatai Zevi tried to launch this sort of mission about 20 years previously, and it didn't have the impact that I'm showing you that he had about 20 years later. So that is another sign, which was to showcase it clearly. He tried this before and didn't prosper. He didn't prevail. Then he tried it again the second time, and then obviously the rest is history. Notice though, and thereafter, Shabbatai Zevi would go to the river Sabbation to take for himself from there a wife, a 13-year-old daughter of our master Moses. Peace be upon him. You can see the Islamic influence. And he will come with the 10 tribes riding a lion, and the halter which will be pulled across its mouth will be a tortuous serpent with 7 heads. Reminds you of the dragon in Revelation. And after, he will make great wars with the nations for 5 years. And at that time, it will be a time of trouble for Jacob. And those are the pangs of the Messiah. Now, look at what it says next. But just before I even show you what it says next, notice, this is giving us more context, more of a foundation for this individual. He was charming, he was charismatic, he had these chronic depressive states, these chronic depressive experiences, but he convinced himself he was the Messiah, married multiple women, divorced them immediately, wants to go to this particular river and find this young woman and marry her, etc. All this stuff's happening. And he's got a prophet Someone who's paving the way for him, saying, this is the Redeemer. This is the Messiah of the God of Jacob. And within a year and a half's time, basically, he's going to transform the whole world. The Sultan is going to come and put the crown upon his head. He's not even going to fight him. So imagine you've got someone so charismatic, but then you've got someone else pushing everything to him. Look at what it says here. This is just now a little lower after what I just read to you. And these words from this prophet entered the heart of how many? The masses. And made an impression also upon some of the sages. And all Israel was aroused to great repentance, both those that are nearby, near to Israel, and far away in the whole world. And they accepted the words of the prophet Nathan of Gaza as words of truth. And that's the source. But notice, you see here when it says sages, the sages, some of the sages bought what he was selling. This is why you can understand why what I showed you previously on the previous chapter happened, where it says in their rabbinic wisdom, they changed everything and said, you know what, we can't let this happen again because this looks very bad on the rabbis. If the rabbis are believing this and encouraging the people to believe this in mass, that looks bad on them. But Rabbi Singer and those people like him would have you believe that the rabbis know exactly what they're doing. But these are examples which show they clearly do not know what they're doing. Now look, everyone has bad stuff and dark stuff in their history. But you know what you're supposed to do? As someone who's walking in the truth, acknowledge it, confess it, and speak against it. You're not supposed to, in wisdom, try to conceal it and hide it and overwrite it and disregard it like it didn't happen. Because when people find out, these are the kind of things where people leave their belief system because they realize, oh wow, I've been lied to. I've been deceived. I wasn't given the truth. And people don't like to be lied to. So, again, I'll just show you this timeline. Jesus came at the beginning. And 2,000 years have gone past. And we've been able to see all the impact of Jesus. And along the way, key individuals like Akiva and Maimonides and all these different individuals have either proclaimed someone who's the Messiah who clearly wasn't the Messiah, or spoken about how the end of time is fast approaching. And they've been wrong. They've been wrong and wrong and wrong and wrong. But somehow, although they've been wrong and wrong and wrong and wrong, they want to tell you that they're right about the greatest event that's ever happened in history. The crucifixion. The act that changed the world and will change your life if you put your trust in Jesus and accept him as your perfect sacrifice for the sins you've committed. All it takes is faith. Believe in your Redeemer and he will set you free. To as many as believed him, it says in John, to them gave he the power to become the sons of God. To as many that has called upon his name. It's not about bloodline. It's not about birth location. It's not about gender. It's not about vocation. It's not about rich or poor. It's not about any of these things. It's all about putting your faith in the one who came and died and rose again. Jesus, the Messiah. This is powerful. Again, Jesus is the one from history that makes sense. Not Bar Kokhba, not Sabbatai Zevi, and definitely not the Rebbe. None of these individuals make sense. Jesus makes sense. This is why you need to be careful when you listen to people like Rabbi Singer, when you hear people regurgitate these sorts of arguments. Just understand, there's a lot of histories that they don't want you to know. Because once you know that history, it changes everything. I'm going to end our session today. I'm going to pray and I'm going to bid you all Godspeed. Heavenly Father, Lord, I thank you for your word. Lord, thank you that you are true and that your word is above everything else. Lord, just as we can see from history, that the impact of your Son, Jesus the Messiah, continues to ripple through time. And Lord, those who have come after you, who have tried to impersonate, who have fraudulently, Lord Father God, impersonated, have led to their own demise. And Lord, help us never be deceived. Help us continue to follow truth. And Lord, open the eyes of those who have seen the truth today, who don't know about truth, and show it to them. Let them come to trust in you as the God of the whole universe, truly. In Jesus' name, amen. All right. That's going to wrap up today's edition of the Sunday Roast. Don't fall for the lies of famous rabbis who want you to be deceived into thinking that they've got all the answers, they know what's going to happen, when clearly when we look at their history, they don't have a clue. Trust the Bible and let the light of God's word lead you every single day. Thank you for tuning into today's live stream, and for those of you watching on the replay, be blessed, and I'll see you next time on the Sunday Roast or on a video we produce before that time. God bless and see you soon.